Hi there, I'm Ken Lammers, and let's talk about Vatican II. Now, if you're anything like me, you have seen a bunch of Vatican II feeds in your YouTube of different arguments about it. And anything from the people who are just adamantly against it, some of whom are schismatic, some of whom are just conservative, but think the Vatican II is apostasy, heresy, terrible, evil, whatever. And to like medium level guys, moderate guys like uh, you know Bishop Barron, who provides a pretty good framework for analysis. Although he does do he defends it. It's kind of lukewarm in his defense. And Father Casey, who has a who's a Franciscan monk and who does a defense, but he's rather young, and it's fairly clear that he doesn't have the context, right? He didn't go through the pains of what happened after Vatican II. Now, let me say this: Vatican II, on its face, wasn't evil and not necessarily even good. It was just right. It was a pastoral council, as we constantly are told, and it wasn't really a theological council about that broke theological ground or affirmed certain theological points. The whole point was okay. Mass has we need to address the modern world, and mass needs to be changed to address the modern world. How we interact with the modern world has to change. Um, and in so doing, it was a stumble by the church, right? In the long term, Vatican II, 500 years from now, might not be something that anybody even talks about, right? But in the short term, it was a stumble, right? Now, let me be clear here. At its beginning, now I'm not quite old enough to remember Latin masses and with the priest facing the altar instead of facing the laity, right? His job was to pray to God, not to entertain the people in the pews, right? And I'm not old enough to remember that. What I remember though is early on, fairly early in the changes, my church, the priest was facing us. It was in English. We had a nice choir that was singing respectful songs. We had really this wasn't normal in a lot of churches, but my church was big enough. It had this pipe organ with big pipes in the wall, not on the organ, and beautiful music from that. And we were doing uh, communion by kneeling, and communion was being given from the priest, and all that was going on. A sign outside, an overt sign of your faith outside of just being in the mass. There was the fast on Friday where you didn't eat meat. You could eat fish, but you couldn't eat meat. Okay, all that was there, and then things just kind of went, and it seemed to be gone. Now I was young. This probably happened over a period of time, but to my young brain, my old memories, it seemed to be gone pretty quickly. Never saw Latin Mass. Latin Masses were banished. Don't believe anybody who tells you, well, they could continue to do the Latin Mass. No, they couldn't. They were not allowed. I remember, rumors back in the day in my church, people getting very excited that Father such and such was going to do a Latin Mass, and then counter rumors would come down, a week or two later. Father such and such got told to knock that stuff off. We ain't doing Latin. That was where things were, or at least that was very much where the perception of things were. And I don't remember seeing any Latin masses anywhere. So that's all as it was. And at that point, it was still reverent and solemn, etc. And then it wasn't right. The choir got moved from the primary mass at 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock seems to be the primary mass at most Catholic churches I've gone to. It got moved to the 9 o'clock mass, and as I remember, it withered on the vine at 9 o'clock. We ended up going to the 9 o'clock mass ourselves eventually, but it withered on the vine at 9 o'clock. The pipe organ, I don't know if it works now. It just stopped being used. Period. All that stopped. And what replaced it at the 11 o'clock mass? A guy sitting up there next to the altar with a banjo. Ding, 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 our Father, ding, 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 who art in heaven, ding, 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 hallowed be thy name. And I just remember, like, early on, it became normative after a while, normal, But I remember early on people going, "What? What?" And like I said, this is about the time Mom didn't leave because we stopped using Latin. This is about the time Mom left, stopped going to church. That's not the church, right? And folk songs of serious prayers like the Lord's Prayer for or Our Father, and I I will admit I won't do it. I won't sing Our Father. I mean, unless you come up with something, show me, and there probably is somewhere out there, something as beautiful a rendition of the Our Father as there is the Hail Mary in Ave Maria, right? You show me that beautiful rendition, and I will probably sing the Lord's Prayer poorly, but I'll sing it. And but that I won't sing it in. I won't do a folk song, and even with the more respectful versions you hear now, I'm still going to say it out loud. I'm going to recite it. I think it's due that respect. But okay, so all that happens. They also decide that we're not going to be as respectful to the Eucharist anymore, right? I understand the theology didn't change at all, not one bit. It's still the body of Christ, right? I get that. But the way we, as a laity, treated it became much less respectful, right? Suddenly, instead of you going up and kneeling and being very formal and receiving the Eucharist, uh, it was handed out to a bunch of lay people who then walked out, and we all just got in line and ate it like it was a Cheeto, right? Much less respectful, much less reverent, and it de-emphasized the Eucharist, which is a big no-no. Also, outside of the actual masses, when they said, "Okay, you don't have to fast on Friday anymore," they took away the laity's overt sign of faith. Right? I'm not eating meat on Friday. I'm eating fish. And I know everybody didn't do it. That's always like any rule. There are people who break it, right? But I'm a Catholic. I eat fish on Fridays. I don't eat meat. This is an overt sign of my faith. Is it theologically important? No, but it's an overt sign of my faith and keeps me in the faith, keeps it in my mind that I'm Catholic and all that. No, we're not doing that anymore. It's just like all that stuff got ripped out. And suddenly we're at, a non universal church, where Mass is different everywhere. We got wackadoodles out there doing things like clown masses. By the grace of God and some sanity in my church, we never got there, right? But you can find pictures of them all over the place on the internet, and some of the big mistakes, were the de-emphasizing the reverence for the Eucharist. That was a monstrously huge mistake. That's one we actually probably could correct still, but they won't. And the other big mistake was switching from Latin to the local languages. Latin to the local languages sounds like it's a good idea. The people will be more involved in the Mass and all that. It sounds like a good idea until you travel to a place where somebody doesn't speak your same language. What it did was it changed a universal church with one universal language to a bunch of siloed churches or franchise churches, right? Um, you know, so for instance, here's an example of the Latin Mass.
Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. Christe eleison. Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. Gloria in excelsis Deo, et in terra pax hominibus bone voluntatis. Laudamus te, benedicimus te, adoramus te, glorificamus te, gratias agimus tibi. Propter Magnum gloriam tuam, Domine Deus Rex Celestis Deus Pater Omnipotens, Domine Filii Unigenite, Iesu Christe, Domine Deus Agnus Dei Filius Patris, qui tollis peccata mundi miserere nobis, qui tollis peccata mundi, suscipe deprecationem nostra, qui sedes ad dexteram Patris miserere nobis, quoniam tu solus sanctus, tu solus Dominus, tu solus Altissimus, Iesu Christe, cum Sancto Spiritu, in gloria Dei Patris. Amen.
Priest is facing away from you, and I can understand why you might want to change that, because back in the day, 50s, 60s, you didn't have a microphone on him and you couldn't hear him, so there would be times where he's doing, very sacred things up there, but you aren't, all you're doing is sitting there in the pews for 10, 15 minutes and watching him stand and maybe move back and forth a little bit, right? You can understand why they might want to change that to be more involving of the laity. The Latin thing, though, is a mistake, and we ended up with, well, here, I'll show you an example of what we ended up with.
Lord Jesus Christ.
Vraiment, il est juste et bon de te
Kweli ni vema na haki tukushukuru
हे परमपिता, तू वास्तव में पवित्र है.
tunatambua kwamba ni fahari
Okay, so what you got there starts out with a priest starting to pray in English, actually at Christ King, the church I grew up going to. Then there's a priest in Japanese. Then there's a priest in French. Then there's a priest in Swahili. Then there's a priest in Hindi. And then you get the mix of all of them, and you get the babble, right? It was a mistake. I've lived through that mistake. I've gone to Mass in different countries. I went to Mass in Cairo, Egypt. I understood generally what was going on in Mass, but I couldn't understand enough of the words. And I was a moderate level Arabic linguist. Couldn't understand the words all that well. When I was in the Army, we were over in Saudi Arabia, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, we didn't have a Catholic chaplain in my unit, anywhere in my battalion, brigade, I guess. So they brought in a chaplain from the French Army and took us all of us Catholics went over to a tent where they closed us up, where apparently the Saudis weren't supposed to understand that we were Christian or doing Christian things. So we're in there. He's trying to do Mass. He's got a poor chaplain's assistant who is trying to translate and just not doing it, right? Not carrying the day. I don't blame him for a second for that. If you took me, even at the best of my Arabic speaking abilities, and stuck me next to a priest and said, okay, he's going to do the Mass in English and you're going to translate to Arabic, I would have flopped 100%, 100 times out of 100. And so this poor kid just couldn't do it. Everybody got very frustrated. The priest got through the Mass as quickly as he could, and we all got the Eucharist, the important part, right? But it was a frustrating experience. And in modern time, this is still going on. These sort of things are still going on. The church I go to, just across the state line in Tennessee, has 4 English masses and 1 Spanish mass every weekend, right? 5:30 Saturday, 8 Sunday, 9:30 Sunday, and 5:30 Sunday are English. The 12:30 on Sunday is Spanish. For some reason, this church doesn't have an 11 a.m. Mass, the usual biggest Mass that you have at a church. But that's fine week to week, although I do feel a little bit sorry for the people who are Spanish linguists, because I don't think any of the priests, or either of the priests there, speak Spanish as a primary or a dual linguist type of issue. I think they're muddling through as best they can, and so they aren't really getting a great experience in a Spanish Mass. But that's all fine until we get to the high holidays like Christmas and Easter, at which point the Mass is divided up into 1/3 Spanish, 2/3 English. And I would say that when you're at those holidays, and we all know how the church gets flooded on the higher holidays, it's probably like 80% English speakers, and 20% Spanish. And there may be a percent or two of some other language that's primary language. But it's Catholic Church. You're going to have Tagalog, people from Africa, people from Asia. That's that sort of thing. but primarily English and Spanish. So for a third of the Mass, as an English speaker, I am excluded from it. And for 2/3 of the Mass, as Spanish speakers, they're excluded from it, right? So that doesn't work. Whereas if we still had Latin, guys, it would work. Uh, at least better than this does. Again, can't blame the priest for that. That is a situation where he's making the best with what he's got. We have a church that has become, at the time, and this has changed over time somewhat, it has been clawed back some, right? Um, and let me try to use a framework that Bishop Barron uses. He has this framework, and I can't remember the names. He uses the names of some magazines or something. These people are arguing through a bunch of bishops and that. And he looks at it from the 1,000-foot level. You had the spirit of Vatican II folks. You had the moderate Vatican II happened. We made the change. Let's move on with the mission of the church folks. And you had the conservatives who, during the 70s, there's no way, the conservatives had no sway, right? Some of them went out and went schismatic. Others stayed in and just fought their way back, either kind of kept quiet. Well, there was a lot of us keeping quiet in the 70s, but pushed it back as much as they could, right? Which wasn't a whole lot in the 70s. Up till about 1978, probably a little bit past then, the spirit of Vatican II folks ran the table. They were out there going, we must reflect the community. We must, make the church a mirror of the community. We must do all these things, right? And we have to keep changing with the community to try to bring the community in, which we know hasn't worked. But that was their way. And what was it? I think Bishop Barron said this. He said, like, these are guys that are out there. They're not looking towards Vatican II. They're looking towards Vatican IV, 5, 6, 12, right? They just want to keep pushing it out there where the church is not the church anymore, right? Where tradition is just gone, right? You had the moderates, again, that were there saying, no, we did the changes from Vatican II. You people went crazy for a while, but we're going to pull it back in. And between the moderates and the conservatives, who over time became more and more, pushed more and more, the church kind of changed course. But the Catholic Church isn't like your local non-denominational on the corner where a new preacher changes the church, right? No, it's that's kind of it's an ocean liner as opposed to a sailing sloop. It changes slowly directions, and from John Paul II taking over onward, the mass changed, the church changed, but it was a slow thing. He slowly gave a little bit of ground to the conservatives and held off some of the things, from the left that just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And of course, he got sniped at from both sides. Always a sign of a pretty good guy, good leader, and he steered us through most of that, right? Uh, and it worked. It worked fairly well, but still, I mean, like I said, the church got very shallow in belief among the faithful. I think the depth of it increased some during all this, but I mean, still, you have a lot of people going to mass because it's what you do, right? It is it's a social thing and all that. People who probably would, that have families and have jobs and have all this stuff going on, and yeah, they went to catechism once upon a time, but if you ask them what transubstantiation is, they may not be able to tell you, right? They may not be able to tell you why you need to go to a Catholic church as opposed to the Anglican Episcopalian. I really don't understand all the conflicts going on over there at this time, but that church down there who's doing the mass, it looks pretty similar, right? Uh, they don't understand the difference. And then the big bomb falls, right? The sexual abuse stuff. And that the shallow faith that had come out of Vatican II was not equipped to handle that, right? The and I before somebody gets in my comments and starts all the, yes, I understand. I've been told by more than one person the percentage of priests who actually abuse is very small, and it's less than you find in other professions, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, okay, fine. Uh, I'll take your word at that. You still hit it, right? And that's the big crime. If they had turned it in, and I understand why they did it, even right. The anti-Catholic prejudice in the United States. I mean, it seems to have faded now. We've just faded into being generically Christian, where everybody's anti-Christian now. But the anti-Catholic prejudice in the United States was a thing that had been around forever and ever. And I had Protestants back in the day, well before all this, tell me that the only reason anybody became a priest is because they were gay. So I think I had a number of priests that probably would have been surprised by that, but that's the way it was, and so I understand why they hid it and tried to put these guys somewhere where they couldn't cause harm or something like that. And how'd that work out for you guys? You had a church back in the day which had more of a stronger foundation and probably could have withstood this better, was used to the heavy prejudice from everybody, and now you moved it to a more modern time where all of these things come out at one time, and we have a government that's very anti anything religious, Christian, and still the anti-Catholic prejudices are out there. I think it backfired a little bit, maybe just a bit. So now I've got that rant out of the way. Let's say, faith has become fairly shallow over the time because of the way they've handled Vatican II, and the guy, just people just got out of the pool, right? A lot of people just went away, period, just left the faith, gave up. I'm not playing anymore. And the ones that wanted to and really couldn't see a difference between Catholicism and name your Protestant denomination went there, right? And we have huge losses in the Catholic Church. Note the number of churches that are closing all over up north. It's there, and that's because the church wasn't there as a bulwark. The church wasn't there as a beacon. It was there as a social construct. So we've talked about what went wrong, how the stumble occurred, how we've kind of tried to stand back up and go forward. The overall effect in the longer term, I think, has been that a lot of people with shakier faith and shallower faith that aren't self-starters and who really aren't trying to stay with the theology in that shallow thing, belief, have been shaken free. And that leaves your moderates, your right moderates, and your conservatives pushing for a more conservative, solemn, reverent mass service and belief, right? Now, of course, the conservatives, before you get out here, they want us to go back to the Latin and everything, and that's just not going to happen. You would lose a lot more people that way because nobody knows the Latin anymore, right? But the mass has become better, more reverent. The first big sign of that was the retranslation of the Nicene Creed, the changing of how we say, et cum spiritu tuo, how we reply to the priest, that sort of thing. That was the first signs. We've seen other signs, like I used to travel a lot to go to minor league baseball games and minor league hockey games, and now I travel to go to legal seminars, and I end up going to churches that I've never been to before because they're the nearest Catholic church, and I've seen things become more solemn again. I've seen the use of incense, which I'm not the hugest fan of because it irritates my lungs, but it for a lot of people that brings a lot of the solemnity back. I've seen things like a fair number of churches, and I won't say it's a majority because it's probably not, and actually it's probably more like 20-25%, have started saying the prayer to St. Michael, the Archangel, after Mass, an old style, old school thing that made it come back, right? And in the churches that are doing Latin Mass, you're seeing a lot of young people going to the Latin Mass because they don't have the baggage that came before Vatican II. So they see the Latin Mass as the way to go if you want to be solemn and true and in the faith, really strongly in the faith, right? They don't have the baggage, and it really works for them. Uh, Now, what we got to do is make that what we are all doing. Uh, the Novus Ordo. We need to make that a place where everybody can go, and it can really work for them. And like I say, I think churches are heading that way and trying hard. And in the long run, Vatican II will probably just be seen as a blip. Nothing serious. It didn't make theological determinations, absolutely setting lines down like Vatican I did. It definitely isn't the Council of Trent, right, where we're going. Okay, here's the Protestants are out there saying all this stuff. Holy cow! Well, we're going to set out. This is what the Catholic Church is, right? There's no way Vatican II is anywhere near that. So I think in the long term, assuming we adjust, we keep the church on track, we get it back to a point, like I say, where it's a bulwark and a beacon, and the church will look back on these times and go, nothing big happened there. I think that's what we got to hope for and pray for. So let's go forward trying, folks. And that's what I've got for this week. I'll say what I said last week. There is no imprimatur here, no bishop, no priest, no Monsignor, nobody out there who's a cardinal, and definitely not the Pope. Nobody has approved any of this. This is just your basic layman spouting his mind and his thoughts. That's what you get for having Vatican II and letting us, laity go out there and speak our minds. That's all it is, really, is me speaking my mind. And hopefully next week I'll be around to speak it some more on another topic. We'll see what comes to mind by then. And I'll see you then. Bye now.